I have a story to tell you, so let's get started.
I have an okay. How did that even happen? Oh, this is gonna be so distracting. uh, okay, this is gonna be fun. Everybody just try to ignore it. Okay.
When I work on my videos, I have to download a lot of source footages, images, books, videos, all sorts of stuff from all over the internet. And nowadays, a very popular file format is something called WebM. Not to get too into the technical details, but WebM isn't a file format usable by a lot of software, like my video editor. It's basically just for the internet. And because of that, I need to convert it into something I can use, like MP4 or JPEG. My previous converter couldn't do it, so I went looking for a new one. And that's when I stumbled upon something very interesting. A software that was recommended to me was something simply called File Converter. File Converter is an open source program created by the programmer Adrian Allett in 2014, who goes by Tichao online. The problem is the website I just showed you is not the website of File Converter. It's the website of another software called Zamzar. Zamzar, like Allett's File Converter, is a program to convert digital files between different formats. It was developed in 2008, so earlier than File Converter. However, unlike Allett's File Converter, Zamzar is not open source. It is run by a company called Zamzar Limited. Okay, so why does all this matter? For that, I need to quickly explain what open source is. I'm sure all my handsome, beautiful, and smart viewers already know this, but let's just be thorough. Open source softwares are computer softwares that are openly collaborative. Basically, their release licenses allows for the code to be openly viewable, used, shared, and modified by other people. Licenses includes Apache, GPL, and Python. Most of my own works are licensed under their artistic sibling Creative Commons. These licenses are incredibly powerful tools that allows for community-based decentralized development projects that grant resources to creators everywhere for free while protecting the rights of the original creators. Countless videos you enjoy on YouTube uses resources under these licenses. They might even be registered under these licenses, from music to images and even stock footages. Many of the assets in my own video uses these licenses. Open source softwares serve similar functions. All of my creative works, from writing to video editing and even artwork, were made in parts or entirely with open source software. Can you not afford to pay for Microsoft Office? There are open source alternatives. Can you not afford to pay for Photoshop? There are open source alternatives. Can you not afford an operating system for your computer? There are open source alternatives. They make technology freer so that everyone from the poorest pauper to the richest psychopath can use them. Zamzar is not. It is a proprietary software, meaning that without authorization, you do not know what is inside their codes, and they can make you pay for using them both financially and legally. There is nothing inherently wrong with proprietary licenses, in the same way there isn't anything wrong with having copyright laws. People need them. I am not saying they are bad. They have their place. But because of the private nature of them, they can be abused. While open source codes can be checked by anyone who can read them for things like malwares and trojans, proprietary softwares are black boxes where we just have to trust a company or individual to not screw with us. Recently, Adobe, the company responsible for Flash and Photoshop, has come under incredible scrutiny for their business practices. And by recently, I mean for like 20 years. There are even segments of the IT world debating if their softwares can be considered malware. This is all to say the reputation of these proprietary softwares are very fickle. Even large companies cannot be fully trusted, and it doesn't help when companies like Zamzar are pulling off stunts like this. What you're looking at is Zamzar's quote-unquote file converter website. It's what I showed you before, and this is Adrian Allett's file converter website. Allett's file converter is hosted on the website fileconverter.io. However, it used to be hosted on fileconverter.org. Zamzar bought fileconverter.org, which made Allett move his website to fileconverter.io. Zamzar then used the exact same layout as alert as what can only be seen as a scummy trick to trick people into thinking that they are alert's file converter. The only thing that can warn you of the differences is this tiny disclaimer at the bottom of the page. According to Whois, FileConverter.org is likely owned by Zamzar, being registered in Britain, the location of the company, while FileConverter.io is likely run by Alert, being located in France. I need to make it clear, there is nothing wrong with Zamzar as a software or a company. The software works the way it says it works, or it should. When I accidentally downloaded it thinking it was Alert's file converter, it didn't work at all, which was partly the reason I started to look them up. But it seems to work for enough people that it's not a case of outright fraud. What I wanted to focus on is the marketing. You might not end up using Zamzar because it is a good file converter. You might not even use it because that's what you turn up when you're searching. You use it because you were looking for alerts. If you're someone like me who is a frequent user of open source software, your search term will be something like open source file converter. And when you search for that, you will get alerts file converter. But you will also get Zamzar, specifically the version of Zamzar hosted on Alert's old website. To understand why this happens, it's because of how search engines work. Search engines will send out crawlers across the internet looking for keywords, codes, and contents that they will then index, which is to store them in kind of like a library, like giving categories and genres to videos and games based on description and their synopsis. So when you search for something like file converter, it will give you the websites with those keywords. This will include Alert's file converter, but more importantly, this will also include Zamzar, but not fileconverter.org's Zamzar, but zamzar.com itself. But because Zamzar isn't open source, it doesn't have those keywords. So if you search for open source file converter, zamzar.com doesn't appear. This is likely why Zamzar bought fileconverter.org. Because of how it originally hosted Alert's open source software, it's been indexed as open source, so it will show up in the search for open source. And it will keep showing up until a web crawler runs through the website again and update the index in just the right way needed for it to change in the search result. This can take anywhere from days to years. In that time, Zamzar has successfully bought its way onto the top of a search result, and people like me will click on their website even after double checking with the community because the web page has changed, but the name stayed the same. Hey, Future Aiden here. After looking more into Zamzar, I found an old article about the founders talking about the development of another software company of theirs called the 48ers. In it, they mention something very interesting, which is that they use open source codes for their programming. And I find this incredibly scummy. Like, there's nothing wrong with companies using open source codes. That's the whole point of open source stuff. But to use open source stuff and then to turn around and pull a stunt like burying another open source program, it's shit. All right, there's no sugarcoating it. It's shit. Again, it's not illegal behavior. It's not wrong. It's just really, 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 really scummy. It's like there's a pie, a very edible pie, and in the middle of it, there's like just a little bit of shit. You could still eat the rest of the pie, but there's a piece of shit on the pie. So, bleh. This is basically a scummy form of advertising, but because it doesn't show up with all the warnings of advertising and it goes out of its way to disguise itself as its open source counterpart, people will fall for it. This is part of what designers call dark patterns, also known as deceptive design. Zamzar in particular is perpetuating something called a misdirection, which is done by focusing the people's attention on a more expensive option while hiding or diluting the cheaper or better one. And depending on which country you live in, some of these dark pattern methods are illegal. While this field of studies is usually talked about in UX and UI designs, I want to argue in this video that its definition should be expanded to things like advertising and even market manipulation, because companies are getting smarter. Not smarter in how to provide better products, but how to keep you using their shitty ones. They are creating dark ecosystems using multiple aspects of dark pattern and designs that traps users into using their products or services, or tricks them into using them in the first place for as long as they possibly can. While older and smaller scale execution of dark patterns are meant for singular services or products, nowadays, like what Zamzar tried to do in the open source space, these dark ecosystems are being used to create artificial monopolies where they can expand their reach to as many of their field as possible. Apple would be one such system. If you use Apple products, you will likely end up using only Apple products because their products are not cross-compatible with others. You are stuck in their ecosystem. Basically, if you use an iPhone, you cannot easily change it to an Android if you want to. This goes all the way down to things like their charging cables and headphones, which they design specifically only to be used with their own products. But because I'm not an Apple user, I can't really explain that system very well. Others would have a better insight than I do. But I will focus on an ecosystem I do hold knowledge of. For a long time for my work, I used these softwares made by a tiny company you might have never heard of called Adobe. So why did I keep using them? I can only describe the Adobe system as the most successful and complicated dark pattern ecosystem in the world. I will add a bottom third here for every dark pattern that appears as I run you through Adobe's ecosystem. If you ever try to buy something from Adobe's website, you'll notice that the way they show their pricing is overly complicated, and without reading the fine prints, you may not know what you are paying for or that there are better options, like paying twice the price for cloud storage that you can get elsewhere for far lower cost. The individual softwares are also ridiculously expensive. For example, their video software alone costs 276 USD a year every year, but their competitor DaVinci Resolve costs just $20 more for a lifetime license that lasts forever. Video editing software for filmmakers isn't an optional tool. It shouldn't be something we have to rent. It'll be the equivalent of telling drivers that they cannot buy tires and you have to rent all of them from this one tire company. But Adobe doesn't provide that option to just buy their products, at least not anymore. They used to, and that let them corner the market, becoming a functional monopoly in the industry. And like all examples of late stage capitalism, they decided to use their monopoly to squeeze their users of every cent by changing it into a subscription model after having bought out every single one of their competitors. Basically, it's microtransaction for work and life. And you might be asking why people don't just not use Adobe. The reason is simple. When I was in school, the entire Adobe Creative Suite was free. The school was given license to use Adobe for a heavily discounted rate, and because of that, when we graduated, everyone used Adobe. Everyone has Adobe because everyone only use Adobe, not just in school, but across the entire industry. Even now, the cheapest way to afford Adobe is through schools. Adobe markets heavily through schools to get people while they are young. And when you have to use even just one Adobe system, Adobe is very good at making you end up with all Adobe system. Say you want to use Photoshop, the most common entry point for digital artists. You rent it for $23 a month. Eventually, your work gets more complex and you need to do stuff like graphic design, so you decided to upgrade. You now need Adobe Illustrator and InDesign, but that costs $69 a month. Nice. If that's the case, might as well rent the whole suite for $60. Boom. You now use only Adobe. Video editing, drawing, audio, everything is Adobe. Everything. You're now paying over $600 a year just for that 3 initial software that you needed for your work. And as you get better at your job, you'll need more and more things. Say you want to expand from illustration into video editing. How convenient for you to have the entire Adobe suite. Just jump straight into Premiere Pro, but because of how Adobe apps interact with each other, to get the full capabilities of each app, you need to use other Adobe apps. DaVinci Resolve has video, audio, and effects editing all included in their single editor. But Adobe separates these three jobs into three different softwares. Now, if you want to change just one software, you'll need to now change all your software. You'll need to relearn all of it, which makes it hard for you to quit. There's a reason why in the industry, Photoshop and Illustrator are the most stable of Adobe software, because they are your entry point. If you get them, you're hooked. Now imagine this pipeline, but for every single artist at your school. Hell, try every school. The reason why my school received a discounted rate on Adobe is because Adobe markets heavily to education sectors. Schools get a discounted rate to hook you into Adobe's ecosystem, and once you're out, you'll have to keep paying for the rest of your life. If you want to keep your job in an industry built by people who use Adobe software, coming out from schools subsidized by Adobe, you better keep paying Adobe to be one of the people who will continue to perpetuate using Adobe. Adobe, Adobe, Adobe. That doesn't include how Adobe can make it difficult for people to unsubscribe from their services. All these dark patterns keep you trapped, making it hard for you to leave through emotional and psychological weight. And all of this does sound terrible, because it is. How do we fight this? How do we overturn such systemic manipulation? And this is where I get to do something I rarely get to do on this channel. I get to tell you the good news. One of the downsides to dark patterns is that over a long period of time, it erodes consumers' trust. The patterns can get annoying enough that people will just stop using your product. So while Zamzar's little file converter stunt may have bought them more clicks in the short term, they have irreversibly damaged their reputation. Users who are informed from forums and online communities spreading the word, or maybe even from watching videos like this one, are now likely to use Adrian Elliot's file converter instead, simply because it's more trustworthy. In these companies' short-term goals to push their number ticker up, they slowly burn all their bridges for the future. This is one of those few times where the market truly gets to decide. You can, right now, choose not to use any of these softwares. I argue that dark patterns are not the natural evolution of marketing, or at least not for software, but the dying gaps of the failures of capitalism. Softwares have finally outpaced these companies' marketing departments. Better alternatives are not only available now, but all of them open source. These creative tools are now accessible to the hands of everyone. These are all the creative processes I have worked with that require software, and these are all the apps provided by Adobe's Creative Suite for those needs. For fun, let's throw Zamzar in for file conversion. You already know of Elliot's file converter, but if you want something just for video, Handbrake is something I've been using for years. If you're someone who uses Photoshop for drawing, give Krita a try. GIMP is another open source alternative for photo editing. For video editing, I recommend Shortcut. If you need more, DaVinci has a far better commercial product while being a lot less scummy. And Audacity's audio editing quality has long since been able to replace Adobe's Audition. Blender is a powerful replacement for Adobe's After Effects, but if you find the learning curve too steep, B for Artist is a fork that I can strongly recommend. Adobe Firefly can be replaced with this garbage can, and while Krita can also replace Adobe Animate, Toons is a more dedicated software famously used by Studio Ghibli. Let's not forget about Scribus, which I have been using for setting books as a replacement for Adobe's InDesign. And finally, for vector illustrations, Inkscape's new updates have put it on par with Adobe's Illustrator. Bonus round, if you find Microsoft's Office Suite annoying, Libre and Apache Open Office Suites will do just fine. We live in a world of access. Throughout every industry, every product, there are more of everything than there are people who want or need them. And while it may seem impossible to get physical things into the hands of everyone that needs them, at the very least, in this digital world where weight is measured in bytes, not grams, we can give a little bit of power and convenience without one for cost or needs. Millions of people, myself included, contributes to open source and Creative Commons works and licenses every day. You can contribute either in donations or just creating your own stuff under those licenses. Your work right now can be shared to the world, used to build larger things that can surpass all expectations. This shit was made in an open source software. This video of mine is licensed under Creative Commons. All videos of mine is licensed under Creative Commons if I remember to set them as such. You can just use them to make more art. We have the tools to make art and softwares available for the masses, to make introduction into the mediums and open gate instead of company controlled toll booths. Right now, as you're watching this, you have the collective knowledge of generations of countless people from art and tech, freely given and shared for no want, but the opportunity to provide the power of creation and access itself to the masses, all in the palm of your hands. Use it. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I forgot to film an outro on my normal background, so you get to see my secondary background. It's, oh my god, it's so dusty, what the hell. I want to thank my patrons, and especially a shout out to my very handsome, beautiful, and smart VIP patron, Oriole. Their support really helps with making all of my videos. I hope everybody gives open source programs a try, because open source programs get better the more people use it. Unlike proprietary softwares, where the development of a software is tied to a company, open source softwares are tied to the amount of people who use it. The more people who use it, the more people who contribute to it, the more development goes into a program. One of the programs that I mentioned in this video, B for Artists, is a fork of Blender from people who wanted to create a different user interface for Blender, and it created a pretty good alternative. So the more people who use open source, the more options we get. I'm slowly getting back into the pace of making deeper dive videos after my break last year. Hopefully I can get more well-researched videos out to you this year, so look forward to that. Or don't look forward to it, depending on how terrible the story is gonna be. And knowing my channel, it's gonna be about 80% really bad and 20% like this one, somewhat bad. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Bye.